I've heard this question being thrown around a lot. Is Tom Nook, the raccoon from Nintendo's smash hit Animal Crossing, good or evil? It seems like an interesting question to ask. On one hand, he's been accused of being a villain, a greed-driven tyrant, and a mob boss. On the other hand, most players know him as their cheerful leader who provides them with the creative freedom to design their very own deserted island. The problem is there are so many videos discussing this question, so I wanted to approach it from a different perspective. I didn't want to just ask, is he good or evil? But instead, with Tom Nook being called a good businessman with evil qualities, is it possible that he's based on a real-life person? Maybe even someone within Nintendo? Hello everyone and welcome back to An Honest Critique. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back. After uploading an allegorical reading of Disney's Coco, I thought I'd turn my attention to video games this week. Really quick, if you haven't already watched my last video on Coco, please check it out. I've linked it on this video and in the description below. For today's video, I wanted to talk about Animal Crossing. As someone who's played over 265 hours of Animal Crossing New Horizons, I have had a lot of thoughts about the game and its variety of characters. In fact, I wrote this script a few times. At first, I thought I'd discuss how Tom Nook is this cult leader who lures you to this beautiful island only to put you to work and cut you off from all your family and friends.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
But there just wasn't enough evidence to support that theory. Then I wanted to talk about how the whole Animal Crossing game was really a pyramid scheme, with Tom Nook recruiting you and pushing you to recruit 10 more villagers yourself. Again, another super interesting idea, but just not that much there to support it. So with those two ideas out, I couldn't help but focus on the character who inspired them both, Tom Nook. Like I mentioned before, he's been at the middle of this debate of whether he's good or evil for a long time, and I think a lot of people have made some really good videos deep diving into the different games and how he's portrayed, but with so many people already having discussed it, I didn't feel like I could do it justice, especially when I just started playing Animal Crossing this past year. So then I started thinking, what is it about Tom Nook that makes him such an intriguing character? After doing just a little bit of research, I found out that he has slowly climbed the ranks within the Animal Crossing universe to become the super successful businessman he is. So then I wondered, is it possible that he was modeled after another important businessman, maybe within our universe? And that's when I had an idea. Maybe Tom Nook is based on the businessman that created his universe, Hiroshi Yamauchi, who served as Nintendo's third president from September 1949 to May 24, 2002. I know what you're thinking, it's another metaphor video. But after researching Yamauchi's early life and his own rise to success, I couldn't help but make some really interesting connections between his life and Tom Nook's. Am I weird for comparing a Japanese billionaire to a video game raccoon?
Yes I am.
But I did it anyway. So, without further ado, let's get into this. If you haven't played Animal Crossing, you probably don't know who Tom Nook is. Let me give you a quick rundown. Tom Nook is a character who plays the most important role in all the Animal Crossing games. He's a raccoon in the Western version of the game and a tanuki or raccoon dog in the Japanese version. In the first 3 installments of the game, Tom Nook is the manager of the town shop, where he works with his 2 apprentices, Timmy and Tommy. There's a bit of a debate as to whether or not Timmy and Tommy are related to Tom Nook, especially since their last names are Nook. The Animal Crossing e-reader cards imply that the Nooklings are Tom's sons or nephews, but there's a lot more proof suggesting otherwise. In Animal Crossing Wild World, Tom Nook says that he has no relation to Timmy and Tommy and that they are simply his employees. In later games, certain villagers mention that Tom Nook found the Nooklings as orphans and adopted them. So for this video, we'll say they're not related. In the 4th game, New Leaf, Tom Nook goes from being a simple shop manager to breaking into the real estate business, and he opens Nook's Homes, while Timmy and Tommy run the town shop. In the newest version of the game, New Horizons, Tom Nook becomes the head of Nook Incorporated. He acts as a leader on the island, giving its residents tasks to complete and offering upgrades to help the island reach 5-star status. It's clear that Tom Nook is a businessman with a variety of skills that have helped him slowly climb the ranks of different industries. Now, like I mentioned before, there has been this heated debate about whether Tom Nook is good or evil, mainly because of the things he has said and done in these different versions of the game. In one version, he can be seen berating the residents, making fun of them, etc. And in others, he can be seen badgering the residents for payments and even threatening them if they don't pay up. In others, he puts you to work to pay off your debt and then fires you when he's done with you. In the newest version of the games, Tom Nook is notably much nicer to his residents and gives you, the player, complete creative freedom to design the village as you wish. This double-sided personality is a big reason why I started thinking that Tom Nook may be a representation of Yamauchi. Hiroshi Yamauchi was born in Kyoto to father Shikanojo Inaba and mother Kimi in 1929. His father abandoned him when he was just 5 years old, and his mother gave him up to her parents who adopted him as their own. Because Yamauchi's grandfather was the president of Nintendo, his adoption would play a very important role in the future of the company. During World War II, Yamauchi was too young to fight, so he worked in a military factory instead. After the war, he went to Waseda University to study law. In 1949, Yamauchi's grandfather, Sekiryo Kaneda, had a stroke. Because he had no other successor, Kaneda asked Yamauchi to take over the company, though he was still a student at Waseda University. Interestingly, Yamauchi would only accept the role if he was the only family member working at Nintendo. Though his grandfather was reluctant to accept this ultimatum, he ultimately agreed, and Yamauchi's older cousin was fired as a result. Yamauchi left Waseda University and took over the company at just 22 years old. His grandfather passed away shortly after. Because Yamauchi had absolutely no managerial experience whatsoever, there was a lot of resentment towards him. The workers even organized a strike, expecting Yamauchi to cave in and walk out, but he didn't. Instead, Yamauchi asserted his authority and started firing longtime employees who opposed his leadership. In addition to those constant firings, Yamauchi was said to have a kind of imperialist managing style, in which he was the sole judge of what products would go on the market. If you didn't know, Nintendo was originally a playing card company. It wasn't until 1959 when Yamauchi made a deal with Disney to market the playing cards as party games for the whole family that his business mentality began to shift. He realized that card manufacturing, though a steady and relatively successful business for him at the time, was not going to help him hit it big. This is what led him to diversify his company's business ideas. He tried a taxi company, a love hotel, and instant rice, but none of these were success stories. While these examples all failed, the fact that he tried something new certainly demonstrated his bold and non-conservative nature. While Nintendo was on the brink of bankruptcy, Yamauchi saw one of his engineers playing a claw game. He felt a sense of nostalgia because he loved playing the claw game as a child, and that is when he ordered the engineer to make the claw games into a product that he could sell. And just like that, he broke into the toy-making business. Yamauchi realized that with technological breakthroughs happening in the electronic industry, he had to explore those options for his own products, especially because the prices were decreasing. Atari and Magnavox were already selling gaming devices for television sets, so Yamauchi negotiated a license with Magnavox to sell its game console, the Magnavox Odyssey. After hiring several sharp electronics employees, Nintendo launched the Color TV Game 6 in Japan, which was followed by several revisions and updates of the series. As Yamauchi's company continued testing different gaming systems, he realized he needed some help to create the games that would be played on these consoles. One very important trait that Yamauchi possessed was being able to spot talent. He handpicked Gunpei Yokoi, the creator of the Game Boy, from his factory floor, and Shigeru Miyamoto, creator of Mario and Zelda, despite Miyamoto's non-businesslike persona. The book Game Over by David Sheff has the best insight on this. Sheff wrote, "Nintendo would, Yamauchi decided, become a haven for video game artists, for it was artists, not technicians, who made great games." The company would go on to make a variety of products, including the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, the Nintendo 64, GameCube, and so on. And with artists like Yokoi and Miyamoto helping to create a variety of games and characters, Nintendo's success would continue to skyrocket for years to come. On May 24, 2002, Yamauchi stepped down as president of Nintendo and was succeeded by the head of Nintendo's corporate planning division, Satoru Iwata. An interesting fact about Yamauchi is that he refused to accept his retirement pension, which was reported to be around $9 to $14 million, because he believed that Nintendo could put it to better use. While Yamauchi seemed all business, he was also a son and a grandson at the end of the day. Shortly after Yamauchi became Nintendo's president in 1949, his father Shika Nojo, who abandoned him at just 5 years old, returned to see him. However, whether it was anger or pride, Yamauchi refused to see his father and turned him away. When he was almost 30, Yamauchi found out that his father had passed away, and he immediately regretted missing his chance for reconciliation. He grieved openly for days and regularly visited his father's grave for the rest of his life. This made Shikanojo the second father figure that Yamauchi lost in his life. His grandfather died shortly after he took over the company, and it is said that he saw his grandson as brazen and foolish, never seeing his years of success. Yamauchi died on September 19, 2013, at age 85, following complications of pneumonia. While he was alive, he was often portrayed as this evil business tyrant, and shortly after his death, articles all over the web remembered him as a visionary genius. And so, like the Tom Nook debate, we find ourselves in a similar conundrum, asking if Yamauchi was good or evil. However, this debate isn't the only thing they have in common. Let's find out a little bit more. Why do I think that Tom Nook may be possibly modeled after Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi? I've compiled a few reasons that I believe present a strong case for this argument. Some require a bit of imagination, but all in all, I think these 6 reasons present a good amount of support for the comparison. Again, this isn't me saying that Tom Nook was definitely modeled after Yamauchi, but as an English major, we like to read into things, so let's take a look. Yamauchi had a rough childhood. He was abandoned by his father when he was only 5 years old, and he was given up by his mother when she felt she couldn't manage life as a single parent. When he was adopted by his grandparents, he was sent to a boarding school in Kyoto and then to a military factory during World War II. By the sound of it, Tom Nook didn't have the easiest childhood either. He's quoted as saying, "In my childhood, I lived the kind of life you couldn't even imagine. Indeed, I had to endure certain hardships that I've never spoken of." We don't get too many specifics, but we know he moved away from his hometown to pursue his dreams, only to return after the city chewed him up and spit him out. We know they each go on to become successful businessmen, but both Tom Nook and Yamauchi faced some tough hardships growing up. Maybe it was these obstacles of abandonment and adjusting to new surroundings that contributed to their success down the road. Tom Nook is described as very work-driven, and we see that with his many business ventures in managing the town shop, getting into real estate, and then ultimately leading Nook Incorporated. But it took a lot of struggling for him to get there. We find out that he started small, and he started early, for example, living in a stump that he eventually sold to someone else for twice its value. In other stories about his past, we find out that during his youth, he left home to travel to the big city. His dreams of success were quickly broken by the harsh life in the city. After making nothing of himself, he returns to the player's town, which is also his hometown, to set up his store. Like Tom Nook, Yamauchi left behind his home in Kyoto to go to the bustling city of Shinjuku, where he studied law at Waseda University. He is then thrown into a harsh work environment when he takes over Nintendo at just 22 years old. After dealing with a lot of hardships, failed business ventures, and disgruntled employees, Yamauchi moves back to Kyoto and sets up the Nintendo headquarters there. From there, as we know, the company begins to flourish, just like Tom Nook's. I thought this similar work ethic and chain of events were really interesting. Even though we don't know a lot about Tom Nook's early life, we know that he wasn't successful when he first left his hometown, but he didn't give up. This persistent work ethic is a quality he and Yamauchi both share, because even though he inherited the Nintendo company, it was not smooth sailing for Yamauchi. His employees underestimated him, and they even held a strike hoping he would leave. But just like Tom Nook, Yamauchi didn't give up. He went back to his hometown, and he took the business back with him, which he later made a huge success. In Animal Crossing New Leaf, Tom Nook has become a real estate agent, leaving the management of his store, now known as the Nookling stores, to his apprentices Timmy and Tommy Nook. It's important to note that in Animal Crossing Wild World, 2 versions before New Leaf, Tom Nook makes the distinction that he has no relation to Timmy and Tommy, and that they are simply his employees. In later games, certain villagers mention that Tom Nook found the Nooklings as orphans and adopted them. I bring up Timmy and Tommy for 2 reasons. 1, Yamauchi only took over Nintendo on the condition that he was the only family member at the company. This would coincide with the fact that Tom Nook is constantly reiterating the fact that he is not related to Timmy and Tommy. He, like Yamauchi, wants to be the only family member in the business. My second reason? Like I mentioned before, one quality Yamauchi possessed was being able to spot talent. He handpicked 2 young artists, Gunpei Yokoi, the creator of the Game Boy, from his factory floor, and gave a job to Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Mario and Zelda, to work at his company. These 2 brought so much to the company, like new consoles, new characters, and games that are still bringing the company a lot of success today. The way I see it, Tom Nook, like Yamauchi, brought in 2 talented workers with the distinction that they were not family members to work for him and add some new young perspectives for his business, which they ultimately ran themselves when he left. Maybe Tom Nook only brought them on under the condition that they weren't related to him. That would explain why there are claims that they are family members and others that they aren't. Another instance of bringing in young talented artists can be found with KK Slider. If you don't know, KK Slider is a talented musician whose fame grows over the course of the different games. He goes from being a young guitarist in the first game, who then becomes a DJ in New Leaf, and then ultimately is a sought-after musician in New Horizons. You could say that he was discovered by Tom Nook, and he helped grow his career, especially because it is Tom Nook that invites KK Slider to play on the island when it reaches 3-star status. Thinking back to David Sheff's words, Nintendo would, Yamauchi decided, become a haven for video game artists, for it was artists, not technicians, who made great games. We can see that both Tom Nook and Yamauchi wanted to keep family out of the business, which is really ironic for Yamauchi, seeing as how Nintendo was technically the family business. But another thing is that they were both really good at finding talented individuals with great skills and helping them grow their careers, like Yokoi, Miyamoto, Timmy, Tommy, and KK Slider. Not only did they help boost these guys' careers, but they knew how to use their specific talents to help grow their own businesses as well. As I mentioned before, Tom Nook is a businessman who constantly adapts to suit his customers' needs and the changing times. In the first 3 games, he's a simple shop owner who runs the Nook shop with Timmy and Tommy. In New Leaf, Tom Nook has become a real estate agent, leaving the management of his store to his young apprentices. In New Horizons, Nook has become a travel agent, and it is through his company that you can purchase a getaway package to customize your very own deserted island. It is also in this latest version that Tom Nook is the founder and owner of Nook Incorporated, he runs the resident services building, and he acts as the leader and developer of the island, allowing you, the player, to upgrade it and its various buildings. Yamauchi, like Tom Nook, constantly changed his company to adapt to his customers and the evolving technological advances at the time. Remember, the huge video game company that we know as Nintendo today started off as a simple playing card company, and it didn't become the huge success it is today overnight. Yamauchi tried a series of other companies like a taxi service, a love hotel, and instant rice, but these all failed. Yamauchi knew that in order for his business to be successful, he had to keep trying new things. Once he broke into the toy business, and more importantly the electronic industry, he found his stride and began making upgrades with each product, from the Nintendo Entertainment System to the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, from the Nintendo 64 to the Nintendo GameCube, from the Wii to the Wii U. Maybe not his most successful upgrade, but you get what I'm saying. Yamauchi, like Tom Nook, kept expanding his business by tailoring it to his customers. Another example of this is when Yamauchi had Nintendo expand into the United States arcade market. Japanese hits such as Radarscope, Space Fever, and Sheriff did not achieve the same success in the United States, so Yamauchi turned to designer Shigeru Miyamoto's pet project Donkey Kong in 1981, which did become a smash hit. Though the electronic industry was new to Yamauchi, he learned from others in the industry and eventually expanded internationally with all these products. Examples like these demonstrate how businessmen like Tom Nook and Yamauchi had to constantly learn new skills and change their business models according to the trends they saw around them to become the successful businessmen they became. Tom Nook went from being a shop owner to a real estate agent, from a travel agent to ultimately becoming the head of Nook Incorporated. Similarly, Yamauchi transformed Nintendo from a playing card company to a toy company to an electronics company and ultimately a multi-billion-dollar video game company. It is no secret that Yamauchi had a reputation of being a tough businessman. Right after becoming the president of Nintendo, Yamauchi's employees led a strike against him because they believed he was immature and had no managerial experience. These employees thought that he would cave in and leave, but instead, Yamauchi fired all those who participated in the strike, a lot of them being long-time employees. Another example of his tough leading style happened before he took over the company. Yamauchi presented his grandfather with the ultimatum that he would not run the company unless his cousin who worked there was fired. This sent a huge message to the rest of the company about the kind of person that Yamauchi was. He was also the sole person who decided what products would go on the market, revealing just how controlling he was when it came to business. Tom Nook's reputation definitely mirrors Yamauchi's because he's been labeled as an evil businessman with a harsh demeanor, especially when one looks at his dialogue and actions over the course of the different games. In Happy Home Designer, for example, Tom Nook admits that he'll willingly embrace the idea of people thinking he's scary if it encourages them to pay off their debt. There are a lot of pieces of dialogue like this that make people think Tom Nook is an intimidating businessman who treats those around him harshly, just like Yamauchi. Here are a few examples. In this screenshot, we see Tom Nook berating one of his villagers and saying how short he is and how he can't help but laugh at him. In this picture, we see Tom Nook yelling at one of his employees because he's not wearing his work clothes. And in this picture, probably the best evidence that he is an actual mob boss undercover is that he says, if you can pay off about 1,000 bells a week, that'll work for me. Otherwise, I'll send for the raccoon goons. Again, probably a mob boss. With dialogue like this, it's no surprise that Tom Nook was actually voted one of Nintendo's top villains, despite not technically being a villain character in the game. Another interesting similarity to Yamauchi is Tom Nook's rise to power, while other characters around him seem to disappear or are seemingly fired along the way. Tortimer, for example, is an elderly tortoise who appeared in all the mainline games for the Animal Crossing series, except for the original Animal Forest and New Horizons. He was the mayor in the town that the player moves into, but then in New Leaf, he retires to his own island. The question is, did this mayor really retire, or was he fired by Tom Nook, who became a real estate agent in that version? Maybe real estate agent Tom Nook actually relocated Tortimer as part of his plans to get big players like him out of the way. Mr. Rossetti is another character who appears in all the Animal Crossing games. His primary function was to remind the characters to properly save their games. However, Mr. Rossetti is laid off from work at his surveillance center because the autosave function makes resetting impossible. Interestingly, in the newest version of the game, the character we see when we want to set up important game settings or autosave features is now Tom Nook. So Mr. Rossetti is yet another employee that has been laid off by this mysterious force. Supposedly, Rossetti is now in charge of Nook's Incorporated's rescue service, so we don't see him unless a player gets lost or stuck. But even then, I haven't seen him in the game. Finally, Cap'n is a green turtle that is featured in the Animal Crossing series as a driver of various forms of transportation. He has been known to row boats, drive taxis, and drive buses. However, he does not appear in New Horizons. He is instead replaced by Dodo's Orville and Wilbur and the larger corporation Dodo Airlines. Again, there are some eerie similarities between how these two businessmen rise to power, while longtime employees seem to fall by the wayside on their way up. All of this is not to say that Tom Nook and Yamauchi are just these horrible characters. One really good thing they both share is their dedication to charity. Tom Nook, for example, mentions that he donates 90% of his proceeds to an orphanage 3 towns over, where he even has a wing named after him. Whether this is true, we don't know for sure. But seeing as how he's much nicer in the latest versions of the games, and how much he must be making from his real estate and deserted island getaway package business, I would like to believe it's true. Yamauchi, like Tom Nook, also had a bit of a controversial reputation among his employees, but he also put his company money to good use. When he retired, he refused to accept his pension, so those $9 million to $14 million could be put towards Nintendo's success. Perhaps his most notable act of charity was donating the majority of the $83 million required to help build a cancer hospital in Kyoto, Japan. With this donation, Mr. Yamauchi's non-gaming legacy covered 8 floors with over 80,000 square feet of treatment rooms and equipment. It's clear that both businessmen knew how to make a great profit, but they also knew what money could do when it was put in the right place. These last 2 reasons are definitely going to reveal what an English major I am. Although I personally think they contribute to why Tom Nook is based on Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi, I include them here as honorable mentions because they do require some close reading and a little bit of creative freedom on my part. An interesting fact about Tom Nook is that his birthday is May 30th. I thought this was interesting because he shares his birthday with Hamlet, a famous Shakespearean character who is haunted by the ghost of his father. If you know me, you know that I love Shakespeare, so I had to explore this a bit further. I bring it up as a piece of evidence that Tom Nook is based on Yamauchi because the Nintendo president had a complicated relationship with his father while he was alive and felt an immense amount of regret when he passed. After his father's death, Yamauchi visited his grave regularly to pay his respects and contemplate the fact that he missed out on reconciliation with his father. Shakespeare's Hamlet is similarly tormented by the ghost of his father and the fact that he couldn't save him when he was alive. The fact that the team at Nintendo chose a day that commemorates the Shakespearean character that is tormented by the memory of his father after his death definitely seems like it could be a nod to Yamauchi's personal struggle and relationship with his own father. This last one is my favorite piece of evidence. In New Horizons, Tom Nook reveals his favorite KK Slider song is KK Lament, which features a sad-sounding melody. So what is it about this specific song that I think connects Tom Nook to Yamauchi? Let's take a look at the lyrics. If we close read these lyrics, it's clear that the artist has lost someone who they will never see again. They say, "Never will I see that smile on your face. Never will I feel the warmth of your embrace." I can see Yamauchi in these lines, because from my research, I know that despite years of resentment towards his father, he regretted missing out on reconciliation when he died of a stroke. These lines express how one feels when they realize they will never see a loved one smile again, or never feel their warmth. While it's true that Yamauchi and his father's relationship was almost non-existent after he was abandoned at 5 years old, Yamauchi visited his father's grave after he passed. The lines, "Only can I dwell in what's taken their place since the day that you said goodbye." These lyrics of dwelling on the pain mirror how Yamauchi was grieving for his father for years after his death. A close reading of these lyrics reveal the regret that one feels about someone they've lost. Yamauchi and his father were estranged for years, but when he heard that he had died of a stroke, he was grief-stricken. He immediately regretted missing out on that chance for reconciliation, and that feeling aligns with the lyrics, "If I had known what would happen that day, I would have never treated you so. If I had known that you'd leave me alone, I would only have let our love grow, but now you're gone and you should know." These lines allude to someone passing away, and the artist is grieving for them. Yamauchi grieved openly for days and regularly visited his father's grave for the rest of his life. I know this is a creative, close reading, but after learning so much about Yamauchi and his personal life, I couldn't help but see these connections between the lines. With this being Tom Nook's favorite song and him being the tough businessman he is, I couldn't help but think he was based on the famous Nintendo president who experienced such a similar loss. So, after deep diving into Yamauchi's early life and tracing how he transformed Nintendo from a simple playing card company to a multi-billion-dollar video game company, and after combing through the different Animal Crossing games and tracing Tom Nook's demeanor and growth from a simple shop manager to a real estate agent to a travel agent to the owner of Nook Incorporated, after all of that, do I know for a fact that Tom Nook was based on the Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi? No, I don't. But do I think there's a lot of interesting evidence that makes it a possibility? Yeah, I think I do. And that's the great thing about theories like these. You have an idea, you find evidence, you make these connections, and then when you wrap all that up and put it out into the world, it has the ability to start a conversation. And I think that's really what this channel is all about. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really am having a lot of fun making these. I have tons of ideas that I'm currently working on, and they will come out as soon as I finish them. I do want to prioritize quality over quantity, so they may take some time. But again, that's only because I want to put out my very best work. If you have not subscribed, please consider doing so. Every single subscriber counts, and each one helps me grow this channel. Please like this video if you liked it, and please comment down below if you have any ideas for a future video. Thank you so much for all your support, and I will see you in the next one.